He called me a lowlife after everything I did for him. After every sleepless night, every dollar I earned, every meal I paid for. My own father looked me in the eyes and told me to get out of his house like I was nothing. I stood there in the middle of the living room, the same one I grew up in, and for a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe. The house still smelled like the lemon polish my mom used on the old wooden furniture. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting a dull light fall across my father's face. He was angry, his jaw tight, eyes cold, like he was staring at a stranger instead of the daughter who once worshipped him. "Get out, Harper," he said again, his voice steady this time. "I don't want you here." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. This was the man I'd spent my whole life trying to make proud. The man I'd bought a house for when he lost his job. The man I'd paid hospital bills for when he had his heart scare. I looked at him, waiting for something, some hint of regret, but there was nothing. Only disgust. "Dad," I said quietly, "what did I do?" He scoffed. "What did you do? You walk around like you're better than everyone. Like your money makes you someone. You're not. You're still that same lowlife kid who thought she could outsmart her own family." The words hit harder than I expected. Lowlife. That's what he thought of me. I had worked for everything I had. Every single thing. At 24, I started my business with no investors, no support, just an old laptop and a phone I could barely afford. I built it from nothing, hauling freight contracts, sleeping in my car some nights. I built it into a company worth $20 million. $20 million. And yet, standing there in front of him, none of it meant anything. I thought of all the times I'd written checks to keep the lights on in that house. All the times I'd covered for my brother's debts. I remembered my mom crying quietly once, thanking me for helping, asking me not to tell Dad because it would hurt his pride. Now that pride was the weapon he used to cut me down. My hands shook. I wanted to yell, to tell him how ungrateful he was, how cruel. But I didn't. I just nodded slowly, looking around the room one last time. The photos, the worn couch, the smell of old wood and coffee. If he wanted me gone, I would go. I picked up my coat from the chair and walked to the door. He didn't follow me, didn't say a word. When the door clicked shut behind me, the sound felt like the end of something much bigger than a fight. It was the end of my family. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where everyone knew everyone, and nothing ever really changed. My dad worked at a car parts factory, and my mom stayed home to take care of me and my brother, Cole. From as early as I can remember, Cole was the favorite. He didn't have to try hard for anything. When he got a C in school, Dad said, "At least you passed." When I brought home straight A's, Dad only said, "Don't get cocky." Cole was loud and charming. He could make people laugh, and Dad loved that about him. He used to call him my boy, with that proud look in his eyes that I wanted so badly to see when he looked at me. But with me, it was always about what I was doing wrong. I read too much. I talked too little. I was too serious for my age. At school, I didn't have many friends. I liked staying in the library after class, reading books about business and travel. I dreamed of seeing the world one day, of building something that was mine. But every time I tried to talk about it, Dad would laugh and say, "You think you're going to be some big shot? You're just a kid from nowhere." Mom was gentler. She'd pat my hand and whisper, "Don't mind him, honey. He's just old-fashioned." But she never spoke up when he cut me down. She'd look away, like silence was the safest choice. I think she believed keeping peace was more important than taking sides. I learned early that love in our house had rules. Cole didn't have to earn it, but I did. So I worked hard. I cleaned up, cooked dinner when Mom was tired, and made sure my grades were perfect. Still, it never seemed to matter. When Dad bragged about his family, he talked about Cole's football games or his new job at the garage. My name rarely came up. The only time he noticed me was when I did something that bothered him. Like the day I got accepted into a state university on scholarship. I ran into the living room, holding the letter, so proud I could barely speak. Dad just said, "So you're leaving us now? Think you're too good for home." He smiled at Cole, who was sitting there watching TV, and added, "At least your brother's loyal." That moment stuck with me. It was the first time I realized I could do everything right and still not be enough. After that, I stopped trying to make him proud. I focused on making something of myself instead. But deep down, I still carried that ache. The kind that comes from wanting love from someone who's decided you don't deserve it. Even now, after everything that's happened, I can still hear his voice sometimes, reminding me that I was never the favorite. Never the chosen one. Just the girl who was never enough. When I was 24, I dropped out of college. It wasn't part of the plan, at least not the one my dad had for me. He wanted me to get a real job in some corporate office, one he'd picked out through a friend. I went to the interview, sat there in my best outfit, and they turned me down without a second thought. I remember walking out of that building feeling small, humiliated, and oddly free. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to follow the path he wanted for me. I could make my own. That same week, I started reading everything I could about the shipping and freight business. It sounded boring to most people, but to me it made sense. Trucks, routes, deadlines. Everything fit together like a puzzle. I liked puzzles. I borrowed an old laptop from a friend and set up a desk in the back of my car. That car became my home for almost a year. I parked in rest areas, worked at coffee shops during the day, and showered at gyms when I could. Every morning I told myself, just one more client, Harper. One more chance. The first contract I got was small. A local furniture store that needed help moving shipments. I charged them next to nothing just to get started. I made mistakes, missed deadlines, but I learned fast. Soon, word spread that I was reliable, that I answered calls at any hour and treated people right. Slowly, the contracts got bigger. By the second year, I was running routes across 3 states. I called my company Aeropath Logistics because it reminded me of the idea that no matter how bent the arrow gets, it still finds its way forward. That name kept me going when things got hard. When the money started coming in, I didn't go on trips or buy fancy things. I thought about my family. I wanted to fix everything that had ever made them unhappy. I bought my parents a new house after their roof started leaking. I paid off Cole's credit card debt after he called crying one night. When Mom needed surgery, I covered every hospital bill before Dad even knew about it. He didn't thank me, but he didn't refuse either. I kept hoping maybe this was it. The moment he'd finally be proud of me. When he visited the new house, I stood there waiting for him to say something kind, anything at all. He just walked through the rooms nodding and said, "You spent too much." It hurt, but I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had done it. I had built something out of nothing. A business worth $20 million. A life that no one gave me. I earned it. I thought maybe now, finally, they'd see me as more than the girl who left home. I thought I had earned their love. But deep down, a quiet part of me knew that love wasn't something money could ever buy. Cole showed up at my office one afternoon, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit and a smile that looked forced. He hadn't called in months, so I already knew he wanted something. We sat across from each other in the small glass meeting room, the city lights glowing behind him. He started talking fast, throwing around words like opportunity, partnership, and growth. I listened quietly until he finally got to the point. He wanted me to invest $300,000 in his new consulting business. He said it like it was nothing. Like $300,000 was pocket change. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him carefully. "Cole," I said, "what kind of consulting business?" He hesitated for half a second, then launched into a messy explanation about helping companies improve efficiency. It was vague, full of buzzwords, and I could tell he didn't really have a plan. My stomach sank. I'd seen this pattern before, his big ideas that never went anywhere, followed by another round of debts and excuses. I wanted to help him, but I also knew giving him that money would only make things worse. "Look," I said gently, "I can't invest in something that isn't clear. But if you really want to work, I'll hire you. I could use someone I trust to help manage some of the smaller contracts. You'd earn a salary, and it could grow from there." His smile faded. "You're offering me a job?" he said, almost laughing. "You think I'm some employee?" "It's a start," I said, trying to stay calm. "I just don't want to see you get stuck in another mess." He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You think you're better than me because you've got money now?" Before I could answer, the office door opened. My dad walked in. I didn't even know he was coming. He looked around like the place offended him. Polished floors, clean desks, people moving quickly with purpose. I stood up, trying to smile, but he didn't return it. "What's going on here?" he asked Cole. Cole shrugged. "She doesn't want to help." My dad turned to me. "Your brother comes to you for support, and you turn him down?" "I didn't turn him down," I said quietly. "I offered him a job. I just can't hand over that much money without." "Without what?" Dad snapped. "Without thinking he's smart enough? Good enough? You really think you're better than your own family, don't you?" The words hit like a slap. People in the office had gone quiet, pretending not to listen. My face burned. I wanted to explain, to tell him I'd only ever tried to help, but his eyes were cold. When they left, the silence in the room felt heavy. For the first time, I realized the distance between us wasn't about money. It was pride. My father couldn't stand that his daughter had built something bigger than anything he ever had. And I could feel that pride starting to turn into resentment. It started with my dad saying he just wanted to help. After the argument with Cole, both of them came to me together. They said they wanted to make things right, that we were a family and should trust each other. My dad told me I'd been carrying too much on my shoulders and that I needed people who cared about me to handle the money side of things. Cole sat beside him, nodding like he'd suddenly changed. I didn't want to agree. Something deep inside me whispered not to. But hearing my dad talk like that, calm, almost proud, made me want to believe him. I told myself maybe this was our chance to fix what had broken. Maybe this was how we'd finally be a family again. So I gave them access to part of the company's finances. Not everything, just the accounts that handled smaller payments and vendor costs. I told them it was temporary, just until I could hire a new finance manager. My dad promised he'd make sure every dollar was accounted for. Cole said he'd handle the invoices and paperwork. At first, things seemed fine. They came by the office more often. My dad brought coffee for everyone. Cole acted polite, trying too hard to look professional. I wanted to believe it was working. But after a few months, I started noticing small things that didn't add up. A payment to a supplier I didn't recognize. A missing invoice that Cole swore he'd filed. Numbers that didn't match on monthly reports. When I asked about it, they both brushed it off. "It's just a mix-up," Cole said. "You've been so busy, you probably missed it." My dad added, "You're overthinking again, Harper. You've always done that. Relax, we've got it handled." But it kept happening. More small payments. More missing details. I stayed up late, going through spreadsheets line by line. The more I looked, the more uneasy I felt. There were withdrawals that didn't make sense, money moving between accounts I'd never approved. One night, I called them both to my office. I showed them the printouts and asked straight out if they knew what was going on. Cole laughed, shaking his head. "You seriously think I'd steal from you?" he said. My dad sighed. "You're working yourself into a frenzy again. You need rest, Harper. You're starting to sound paranoid." Their calmness scared me more than the missing money. They spoke to me like I was the problem, like I was losing control. When they left, I sat there staring at the numbers on the screen. Deep down, I already knew the truth. They weren't helping me, they were setting me up. It started with a letter. A plain white envelope sitting on my desk with the words, "Internal Revenue Service," printed at the top. I didn't think much of it at first. I'd always paid everything on time. But when I opened it, my hands began to shake. They were auditing my company. They said there were inconsistencies in my financial records, large sums of money transferred into personal accounts under my name. I spent the whole night going through the files. I traced every number, every payment, every transaction. The deeper I looked, the sicker I felt. The money trail didn't lead to me. It led to fake accounts that looked real enough to fool anyone at first glance. Accounts created using my information, but registered with unfamiliar addresses. Shell accounts. Someone had used my name to move money out of the company. By morning, I already knew who it was. Cole and my dad were the only ones with that kind of access. The same access I had given them, because I thought they wanted to help. My stomach twisted when I realized how neatly they had done it, how it looked like I was the one stealing from my own company. When I confronted them, I expected denial. I didn't expect the blame to turn on me so fast. My dad slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising. "You've made a mess of everything," he said. "You need to hand the company over before you ruin our family's name." "Our family's name?" I asked quietly. "You're the ones who took the money." He glared at me. "Watch your tone. You've lost control. The least you can do is step down before this gets worse." Cole sat beside him, silent but smirking. It was all I needed to see. I told them no. I wasn't giving up what I'd built. Not for them, not for anyone. That's when my dad lost it. His face turned red, his voice shaking with rage. "You're a disgrace," he shouted. "You're not my daughter anymore. Get out of my house." My mom stood in the doorway, crying but saying nothing. I wanted her to stop him, to say something, anything, but she didn't. I walked out without another word. I didn't pack a bag or take anything from my old room. I just grabbed my car keys and my laptop. As I drove away, I looked in the mirror and saw the house getting smaller behind me. It hit me then that everything I'd worked for, everything I'd given, had just fallen apart. I drove for hours without knowing where I was going. I just wanted to be far from everything. Far from that house, that company, those faces I used to call family. When I finally stopped, I was in Denver. I found a small apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place where no one asked questions. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, and the heater barely worked. But it was quiet. I needed quiet. For days, I barely left the apartment. I lived on coffee and microwaved meals, sitting by the window and staring at the city lights below. It was strange to be alone. For the first time in years, no one was calling me for help. No one was asking for money. But the silence hurt. It was the kind of silence that made me face things I didn't want to face. I kept thinking about my dad's words, about the way he looked at me when he told me to leave. Every time I replayed it in my mind, it felt like another piece of me broke off. I had done everything for them. And now I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for years. They never really loved me. They loved what I could give them. The grief came in waves. Some mornings I woke up shaking, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. Other times, I just felt empty. I tried to tell myself to move on, but something in me couldn't rest. I needed to know exactly what they had done. So I started digging. I went through every old file I still had access to, every email, every contract. The numbers still didn't make sense. There were companies listed as partners that I'd never heard of. I called one of the contacts listed and found out they'd never worked with Aeropath Logistics at all. That's when I realized I needed help. I hired a private investigator, a quiet man named Daniel who didn't ask for details. I gave him what little information I had and waited. The days passed slowly, filled with long walks and sleepless nights. Then one evening, he called me. His voice was calm, but what he said made my stomach twist. He'd found proof that my father and Cole had started another company, one that used my business name and accounts to run fake shipments and collect payments illegally. They were making money under my company's name while blaming me for everything. I sat there after the call, staring at the wall for a long time. The hurt started to fade, replaced by something colder and sharper. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to beg for their love or forgiveness. They had taken everything from me. Now, I was going to take everything back. The silence that once felt heavy now felt steady. It wasn't grief anymore. It was the calm before revenge. I spent weeks gathering everything I could find. Every document, every email, every signature they had forged. It wasn't easy to go through all of it. Each file felt like a reminder of how much I'd trusted them. But I kept going, one late night after another, until the whole picture became clear. My father and Cole hadn't just stolen from me. They had built a web of lies, moving money between fake companies and making it look like I was the one responsible. Daniel, the investigator, helped me organize everything into one detailed report. There were copies of bank transfers, invoices with forged signatures, and emails where Cole pretended to be me. I remember sitting there looking at the stack of evidence on my desk. For the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. I felt calm, like I finally had control again. When I walked into the attorney's office, I handed them everything. I told them I wanted to press charges. My voice didn't shake, not once. The lawyer looked through the files and nodded slowly. "This will ruin them," he said. I just replied, "Good." The investigation moved fast. The authorities contacted the company's board, and soon everyone knew the truth. The people who had once whispered that I was careless or greedy were now calling to apologize. I didn't answer most of them. I didn't need their words anymore. When the day came to meet with the board, I walked into the room wearing a simple black suit. I didn't feel proud or nervous. Just steady. They showed me the audit results. Every trace of money that had gone missing was connected to Cole and my father. My name was cleared completely. The board voted to reinstate me as CEO, and for a moment, there was silence in the room. Someone asked if I wanted to make a public statement. I shook my head. "No," I said. "The truth is enough." Meanwhile, everything fell apart for them. The government froze their accounts. The house I'd bought for them was repossessed. Cole's business license was revoked, and my father's name appeared in every local paper for fraud and embezzlement. Their pride, the thing they valued most, was gone. I didn't go to see them. I didn't call. I didn't need to. The revenge wasn't in the shouting or the tears. It was in the silence that followed. The same silence they'd left me in when I walked away from that house. As the months passed, I focused on rebuilding what was left of my company. The people who stayed with me worked harder than ever. We cleaned up the damage they'd caused, piece by piece. And through it all, I felt nothing for the two men who had tried to destroy me. They had lost everything, and I had gained the one thing they never had, peace. Months passed before I realized how tired I truly was. The city, the noise, the endless meetings. It all reminded me of what had been taken from me. I sold my apartment and packed only what I needed. No more business suits or luxury furniture. I wanted quiet, open space, something that didn't carry any memories of them. That's how I ended up in Montana. The ranch I bought wasn't fancy. A small wooden house, a barn, and acres of land stretching as far as I could see. The air was crisp, the sky so wide it made everything else feel small. The first night there, I stood outside watching the sun dip behind the hills. For the first time in years, I felt my chest loosen. No phone calls, no accusations, no expectations, just silence and the sound of wind moving through the grass. The days found their own rhythm. I learned how to care for the horses that came with the property. I fixed fences, cooked simple meals, and read at night by the fire. It was a life that reminded me of who I used to be before the money, before the company, before the need to prove anything to anyone. Sometimes I'd wake up early, walk the field, and think about that girl I once was. The one who dreamed big while everyone else told her she couldn't. I realized that she was still inside me, waiting to be seen again. Out there, under the open Montana sky, I finally met her. One afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox with my mother's handwriting on it. I knew what it was before I opened it. The letter was short. She said my father had fallen ill, that he barely spoke anymore. Cole was drowning in debt, trying to start over but failing. She begged me to call, said the family needed me. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it on the table. For a moment, my chest tightened, but the feeling passed. I had spent too many years trying to save people who never wanted to be saved. I didn't write back. I didn't call. I walked outside, feeling the cold wind brush against my face. The sun was setting again, the sky burning orange and gold. I stood there quietly, watching the light fade. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I wasn't angry either. I was simply free. I moved to Montana, the same place my father once laughed about when I mentioned it years ago. He said only people with no ambition moved out here, that it was a place for those who had given up. But now, standing on this land, I finally understood what peace really meant. It wasn't about giving up, it was about letting go. My house sits on a hill that overlooks miles of open land. Every morning, I wake up to the soft light coming through the windows and the sound of birds instead of traffic. I make coffee, feed the horses, and watch the sunrise before sitting down at my small desk to work. My company still runs, only now I manage it remotely. The chaos of the city feels far away, like another life that doesn't belong to me anymore. The people here are kind and simple. They wave when I pass by, ask about the weather, and bring homemade bread to my door just because. After a while, I started hosting small workshops for local women. Some of them were single mothers, others just trying to start fresh like I did. I taught them the basics of business, how to manage money, build something honest, and believe that they could. Watching them grow brought me a quiet kind of joy I'd never felt before. There are nights when I sit on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and look up at the stars. The air is so clear that the sky looks endless. Sometimes I think about everything that happened, the business, the betrayal, my father's words. But it doesn't hurt anymore. It feels like something that happened to someone else long ago. I still remember the first time I told my dad I wanted to move to Montana. He laughed and said, "You're thinking too small, Harper. You'll never get anywhere hiding out there." Now I smile at the memory because he was wrong. Here, I found more than I ever did in all those years chasing his approval. I built an empire from nothing. I lost everything I thought mattered. And somehow, that's when I finally found myself. There's no bitterness left, no anger. Just peace, the kind that doesn't need to be loud or seen. The mountains, the wind, and the quiet remind me every day that sometimes losing everything isn't the end. It's the beginning of finally being free. Do you think Harper did the right thing by walking away from her family? Or should she have forgiven them and tried again? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.